We turn now to, indeed, the matters of Iran. An initial assessment by the Defense Intelligence Agency concludes that America's strike on Tehran were not as effective as President Trump has been claiming. Earlier this week, Trump said the bombs completely obliterated Tehran's nuclear facilities. But now, 3 people with knowledge of that report say the strikes only set the country's program back by 3 to 6 months. One source told NBC News this assessment is already finding that these core pieces are still intact. The White House, however, is vehemently denying the report. A statement from Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt reads in part, "This alleged assessment is flat out wrong and a clear attempt to demean President Trump. Everyone knows what happens when you drop 14 30,000-pound bombs perfectly on their targets. Total obliteration," she says. According to Axios, Israeli intelligence services believe the strikes caused very significant damage to Iran's nuclear program, but they're still working on a final assessment. These things do take time. Joining us now, NBC News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent Andrea Mitchell, former spokesperson for the U.S. mission to the United Nations, Hagar Shamali. She also worked at the NSC and the Treasury Department, and New York Times columnist Nick Kristof. Our thanks to you all being here, a truly great group. Andrea, I'll start with you. Give us the latest, if you will, from what we're hearing from the White House. President Trump, again, while they're at The Hague, really angrily dismissing the idea that this wasn't a complete and utter success, the strikes over the weekend. But as we've been talking about all morning, these things do take time to try to figure out exactly what happened. So talk to us about the theater of this. Why do you think Trump is so vociferous in what he's saying, and what it could mean for next steps as we learn more and more as to what actually happened?
I think we are on a very dangerous slope, a slippery slope, if you will, because for the President of the United States to be challenging American intelligence, and this is the Defense Intelligence Agency. Now, they were making it very clear. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Kane, the other day after the strike, that it's going to take time. They have to do a lot of analysis. This is a preliminary analysis. It was not, as Caroline Leavitt suggested, deliberately leaked to demean the president. To set up that kind of criticism of the intelligence agency and to criticize the analysts, as Marco Rubio did in an interview, which aired earlier on the program, is to basically say to U.S. intelligence, well, start, shading your analysis to please the president. That's what that kind of interference is exactly what got us into Iraq, when, we were told it was a slam dunk, when they relied on one analyst, Curveball, who was a German source and turned out to be, a fraudulent source who had his own agenda. So, that's how you get into forever wars. And so not only the MAGA base, but, important analysts, independent analysts, should be very concerned when the intelligence community is demeaned this way. I met with the Iranian foreign minister on Friday in Geneva. We were the only Western source that had an interview with Foreign Minister Araghchi before he went on to Moscow. And of course, within 24 hours, he and the rest of the world were shocked by the American strike. And what he said to me is, we think that this diplomacy, the Witkoff diplomacy, is a cover, that we're being betrayed because the Israelis struck us. And we think that the Americans, that President Trump is just, covering with this decoy. He didn't use the word decoy, but he used the word cover-up. It's a betrayal because they were covering for the Israelis. Well, it turned out they were actually decoying for the American strike as well. So to maintain credibility, the president, I assume, is saying that it was obliterated. He said that Saturday night before they had any analysis of the bomb damage assessment. And that's a political response. That's not an intelligence response. And I think, you know so well, Jonathan, covering this for so many years, how important it is to do the kind of analysis, the kind of reporting that David Ignatius did in his column today in the Washington Post. He's uniquely capable of doing that kind of intelligence analysis. The Israelis are somewhere in the middle. The Israelis think that it is, more dangerous, that they still have that highly enriched uranium. So does the IAEA. So that's what the head of the IAEA, the independent analysis said. Grossi said that on Sunday, that they probably trucked it out of there. And that's the problem. This isn't over. And that's what, frankly, the Arab world is, concerned about, that this is not over, that Qatar and others are most likely worried about, people that I've spoken to, that the Israelis are going to go back in with any sign that there still is a nuclear program.
Yeah, and as you're right, Andrea, this is far from the first time that President Trump has criticized U.S. intelligence agencies. He did so famously at Helsinki, other times since, but it would be an entirely different matter if the intelligence starts to shake because of pressure from the White House to give him the story he wants to tell. Hagar, but I wanted to go exactly where Andrea was taking us there, is this the Iranian side of this. First of all, you have noted that they must have had some sense this was coming and probably took preparations just to try to salvage or move parts of their program or the uranium itself. Walk us through that, an area of the world you know so well, and also what you think their next steps will be going forward.
Sure. Well, so, when it comes first to these assessments, I would caution, having been in government a long time, that preliminary assessments are just that. They're just preliminary. And when they leak, it's a problem because it's not really the whole picture. And so right now what you have is a situation where we don't entirely know what the state of Iran's nuclear program. We know the job was not finished. And that in and of itself, whatever you think about Israel's strikes and the United States joining them, that creates an inherent risk. Because if they still have the enriched uranium, which they might have been able to move, and we heard Vice President Vance say that, enriched uranium, by the way, is kind of like big discs, like big, heavy hockey pucks. So they're not difficult to move, but they are highly radioactive. It's not something that you throw in the trunk of your car and put in your garage. So it's if they don't have nuclear facilities to then move that enriched uranium, then I would caution anybody thinking that they are even months away from creating a nuclear weapon. But that said, when you have a situation where the Iranians now have still some kind of fuel or whatever remains of their nuclear facilities, and the job is not finished, and I don't mean to sound like Donald Rumsfeld here, but if you have the job not finished, you have a situation here where they are still going to be incentivized to finish that nuclear weapon. And Israel on its end is not going to accept that, which is why the ceasefire is going to be so fragile. And I believe that President Trump is going to have a hard time holding Israel back if Israel sees any activity that concerns them, or they see movement of this enriched uranium. They're going to strike it because they're going to argue, well, this is in our interest, and we don't see negotiations or diplomacy working, as it hasn't for this many years. And by the way, as it hadn't been working during President Trump's administration, right? We know that during the negotiations, the Iranian regime surged its enrichment of weapons-grade uranium by 50%. The IAEA in May reported this and said that they had enough nuclear material for 9 or 10 nuclear weapons. So this is how Israel's thinking about it, and that's something that Trump is going to struggle with in terms of maintaining this ceasefire.
Yeah, President Trump has said that he won't strike further. He's communicated that to Prime Minister Netanyahu. This is a one and done. But Nick Kristof, you wrote over the weekend in the aftermath of this strike, the three unknowns after the U.S. attack on Iran, the headline there. Now, some of that's, we're now a few days later. What questions are still front of mind for you as we sift through exactly what happened on the weekend and the president considers next steps?
I think the fundamental ones are what happens to the Iranian nuclear program and whether this has done more to end it or to accelerate it. Fundamentally, the aims here of both Israel and the Trump administration were to end the Iranian nuclear program and ideally, depending on who you talk to end the Iranian regime. And I think there are pretty fundamental doubts about whether either has advanced. In my reporting in Iran, I've seen how unpopular that regime is. It's oppressive. It's misogynistic. Almost everybody you talk to complains about the corruption, the hypocrisy, the economic inefficiency of the regime. I remember once talking to a Revolutionary Guard guarding the former American embassy, now called the Den of Spies. And, he told me his favorite movie was Titanic, and he asked about coming to the U.S., and that's a Revolutionary Guard. But now you see something of a rally around the flag effect. It's hard to know how long that will go on, but certainly you don't get the sense the regime is immediately crumbling. And then on the nuclear side, we have lost track of that 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium that had been in Isfahan that appears to have survived. And if some centrifuge capacity has survived either at Natanz or at Fordo or at some other undeclared site, which we aren't aware of, then Iran may indeed decide that actually it really needs a nuclear weapon now and go all out, go in a rush to convert that highly enriched uranium to a weapon, and thus achieving precisely what we had most tried to avoid.